Hey guys, it's the Melblade5, and welcome to my response to Mother's Basement's Persona 5 the Animation is a total waste of time video. If you remember my video on why there haven't been responses, I said that there was a video that I was considering responding to, but wouldn't be able to for another month because I was waiting for the anime I was about to finish. Yeah, I was referring to this video. Kind of jumping the gun, but the main issue I have with this video is that it was made when there were only 3 episodes of the anime. And to not make myself a hypocrite, I wanted to wait until the anime had finished before doing this. However, that took longer than anticipated, as I saw everybody saying that it was going to be 24 episodes long. But they were all wrong. It was actually 26 episodes. Then when the anime did end, and I was preparing to make this response, they revealed that they were going to release an OVA at the end of the year, which I'd imagine is supposed to cover the rest of the game, considering they didn't actually finish the game in the main anime, so then I decided to wait on that. But ultimately, I decided to just make this video anyway, because if I wait for the OVA, then this video wouldn't come out until next year, and I've made barely any responses this year, so I imagine people wouldn't want that, as the responses are what most people enjoy. Of course, I have nothing against Mother's Basement. I don't really watch his videos, as I've only seen a very small number of them, and while there are some I disagree with, it's merely disagreement. That's precisely what this video is about. I just disagree with some of the things said in his video and the way the video was handled. In fact, there are some things in his video I do agree with and will bring them up just to show that I'm not blindly hating on him, despite some people thinking that agreeing with anything the person you're responding to says is idiotic. There is one major disclaimer I need to make before starting. I am not defending Persona 5 the animation. It has a lot of problems. I don't outright dislike it, but just keep in mind that I'm only making this video because of my disagreements with the video, and not because it's criticizing the anime. So skipping most of the intro segment to get to the first part that I disagree with,
there is no reason to watch this anime instead of playing the game it's based on, which already has voice acting, animation, and cinematic direction that is, in many cases, better than the adaptation.
There's no reason to watch the anime when you can play the game. Playing the game is, by miles, the better experience of Persona 5, I won't deny that. But I think that belief is very counterproductive considering that like 99% of anime are adaptations. You could easily apply this to other anime and say, well, what's the point in watching when you could just read the manga or the light novel? I also find this attitude to be pretty fatalistic, as going back to how this video was made when there were only 3 episodes, you're kind of assuming that the anime is just going to copy the game when, as it's an adaptation, it's going to have to make changes, and it does more frequently later on. A lot of the time for the worse, but differences from the game are apparent that aren't just cutting things out. It was even stated before the anime began that it would have a large deviation from the game at one point. I have no idea what that deviation was unless the OVA is going to have something to do with it. So at the time your video was made, changes were promised, but you seem to ignore this claim. Skipping past the point where he talks about how Persona 5's story is too long for a single season anime, because I completely agree with that.
And even the characters who do get development are extremely lacking. An and Ryuji feel like cardboard cutouts next to their in-game counterparts, and Ren somehow has less personality than he did as a sassy silent protagonist, whose name is and always will be Akira. Now he's just the stoic dude who says things to move the plot forward.
So this point on the characters is a mixed bag of agreement and disagreement for me. I agree with you on Ryuji. They got rid of pretty much all of his vulgarness, stupidity, and anger issues, which I've heard some people didn't like, but that's a lot of what I love about Ryuji, so I felt he ended up being pretty bland. An, I disagree with. I felt she was very close to her game counterpart. With the anime only being 3 episodes in at the time of your video, it was only at the part of the game when An is cold towards Akira and Ryuji most of the time, rather than showing her true colors. Literally, the end of episode 3 is An joining the party when she opens up more from that point onward. So I feel you're basing this claim of An's character being butchered off of when she wasn't really being herself. Lastly, with Akira, cause I think Akira Kurusu is the better name, he's in the middle of that. When he's Joker in the metaverse, I felt he wasn't as cocky or sassy as in the game, which bummed me out. But when in the real world, I actually think they followed the game pretty well for the most part, since in the game, he acts timid to avoid any trouble. I do think they could have incorporated his sass in the real world when hanging out with confidants, and I did feel this was kinda boring at times as well, but I also reiterate what I've said before. That's your thoughts on 3 of the main characters, but again, with the timing of your video, we don't get your thoughts on how they handled the rest of the Phantom Thieves. I believe that if you waited until a later point to do this, you could have covered them, and if you felt they were butchered as well, you could have added that on to further prove your point. Personally, I felt that they were very faithful to the rest of the thieves, aside from them toning down Yusuke's eccentricity a bit. So that adds to a point of disagreement for me.
And then there's the one supporting character we've spent time with so far, Shiho. In the game, her attempted suicide is an emotional gut punch with a fair deal of buildup, which galvanizes the heroes and shows that they need to act against Kamoshida. In the anime, it just happens. There's a half second of emotion when An talks to Shiho as she's being put into the ambulance, and then Ryuji and Ren get bored and run off after Mishima to continue the plot.
I don't see how Shiho's suicide attempt came out of nowhere, considering the anime even added a scene that shows Kamoshida physically abusing Shiho, as well as carrying out the lead up to that moment from the game. As for the lack of emotion, they do cut An's immediate reaction when Shiho jumps, which does remove a lot of the shock impact, and I just realized that was a really bad choice of words. But the scene where Shiho's being put in the ambulance played out very similar to how it did in the game. To me, at least. Even when you mention the part with Mishima, unless I'm just misunderstanding the wording you used here, that's exactly what happens in the game. Shiho is put in the ambulance, and Mishima runs off, in which Akira and Ryuji follow him to learn what he knows. Maybe you're complaining about how the scene was paced, because the pacing of the early episodes was way too fast, but that's not what I got from how you worded it. Speaking of the pacing, I'm skipping the part where he talks about that and how it results in cutting out a lot of the metaphysical stuff because I agree with that, as well as how the anime appears to be more targeted to people who've already played the game, because I also agree, and most of how bad the animation is. All I really have to say about that when referring to the animation in general is that I don't think it looks bad all the time. There are moments where I think it looks pretty good, still nowhere near as good as the game's anime cutscenes, albeit those good looking moments are more frequent later on, so it once again goes back to my issue of when the video was made. And relating to that point,
but even the parts of the anime that should definitely be more visually impressive than the game, namely the all-out attacks, which are used in every episode as canned animations and can thus justify having more time spent polishing them up, not unlike a magical girl transformation sequence, they, how to put this nicely, they look like garbage.
The thing with the all-out attacks is, yes, they look terrible. At the time. You say they're in every episode, when, if I want to be nitpicky, they were in the first episode, but that really outdates this video as in episode 5, they slightly improve it by adding the background, his face is still messed up, and then the finishing touch is never used again until episode 21 when it looks much better than before. Still not great, but a major improvement. And the last time it's used, I actually thought it looked cool. It's like A1 Pictures knew it sucked and responded to the backlash before it even started. Further adding to why I think this video should have been made later so this could have been taken into consideration. Skipping past how the game's all-out attacks are so much better.
And let's not even get started on how bad the show's opening is compared to the game's. We'll save that for another video.
I've noticed that you haven't made a video about the opening, so you might already be aware of this, and if that's the case, I apologize for inadvertently insulting your intelligence, but the opening that was used in episode 2 was a placeholder. Starting with episode 4, they used the real opening for the first theme, which is so much better. In fact, on the day that episode 2 came out, I looked at uploads of the placeholder opening just because I really liked the opening theme, and it was reiterated throughout the comments that it was a placeholder, and someone even posted a link to a Japanese article with A1 Pictures stating this themselves. Unfortunately, all of these videos were deleted after the real opening was revealed, but I do know for a fact that that version of the opening was confirmed to be a placeholder immediately. Apparently they used a placeholder because the real opening contained spoilers. though I have no idea what's so spoilery about it as they show all the Phantom Thieves. Plus, the placeholder opening was only used in episode 2, which makes me wonder what the point of it was. But had this video been made after episode 4 aired, then you could have mentioned those things rather than jumping the gun.
The existence of Persona 4 the animation was at least somewhat justified by the fact that it was based on a PS2 game. It's not hard to one-up that visually, or to do things that simply weren't possible in the original story.
But couldn't you make the same argument of what's the point when you can just play the game for Persona 4 the animation? I find it unfair that you give that anime a free pass just because it's a PS2 game when the same rules can apply, and it also goes back to my point of assuming the anime isn't going to make any changes. Skipping the part on how the anime could have been improved by being more stylized, as I do mostly agree with it, assuming he's referring to making it like the game's stylish visuals.
An anime adaptation could take what's only implied by the game's combat system and craft a series of dynamic, exciting action scenes that make full use of the characters' distinctive weapons and powers, as well as the environments around them to allow for creative choreography and, oh wait, no, the fights are just Pokemon battles where everyone throws colored energy at each other until someone dies. Never mind.
Except that with this being made when there were only 3 episodes, there had only been 2 fight scenes at the time. You're judging the entire show's action off of just 2 fight scenes. Granted, first impressions are important, but you're literally just saying the show's action as a whole is bad after watching 2 fight scenes. The first 2 fights weren't very good, but personally I didn't let that bother me much because I thought it was early days, and them being really short came as a result of the fast pacing of the early episodes. After those early fights, I thought the show's action gradually improved over time, to the point that there were moments that, to me, felt legitimately cool and dynamic, like the battles against Kaneshiro, and especially Okumura and Sai, minus several instances of bad-looking animation and CG. While my experience with Persona 4 the animation is limited to just watching clips, the action scenes there didn't feel that different to 5 in terms of structure.
Every fight that we've seen so far has been against mindless monsters, which means that there's not even any narrative significance to the conflicts. They accomplish absolutely nothing except to pad out the anime's runtime, which only serves to further constrain the already bare-bones story.
Even though all the fights at the time were awakening battles, which are pretty major fights in the game, as each focuses on a main character acquiring their persona, breaking free from their metaphorical chains and subsequently joining the party.
And while I was initially happy to see that the 20 out of 10 fantastic original music from the game is being used in the anime, it's used so poorly that I really wish they just hadn't bothered. The main battle theme, Last Surprise, is designed to underscore slow-paced RPG battles, adding tension and excitement as you weigh your options and make clutch decisions. It just doesn't work as generic anime battle music, like not at all. The progression's all wrong. Daybreakers at least recut the song to better match the visuals of its big fight scene, but when it's used to underscore Ryuji's awakening in the show's second episode, it honestly feels more like a bad AMV mashup than the intended musical accompaniment for the scene.
I kinda get what you're saying here about Last Surprise, but I think when used under the right circumstances, it can work really well. For Ryuji's awakening battle, it is the first fight scene in the show, so I can imagine them using Last Surprise to commemorate that, even though willpower is used for the fight in the game. When I got to that part and Last Surprise started playing, it got me really excited to see the fight that was about to unfold, as well as giving me the feeling of, you bad guys are so screwed. Essentially the same feeling the song gives me when I ambush an enemy in the game. While I am speaking for myself here, I wouldn't be surprised that that was the intention. Besides, Ryuji's awakening was the only instance of them using Last Surprise at the time.
Ida Satoki was also the sound director for Tsukigakure, Sakura Quest, Maji, Blue Exorcist, and Angel Beats, so we know that he can do much better work than this, but for whatever reason, he didn't bring his A game to Persona 5, or even his D game, and that just makes the already underwhelming action feel even worse.
But again, this was 3 episodes in at this point. Like what I said with the action, you're judging an entire 26 episode show's sound direction off of just watching the first 3 episodes, and your only example of this is with the Last Surprise part. I imagine there were other moments you had issue with, but the way way it's presented here makes it sound like you're saying the whole sound direction sucks because of one instance.
Well, okay, to be completely fair, we haven't seen Kamoshida's boss battle yet. That is a much more significant fight that's going to demand a unique musical accompaniment, and it's going to more or less require more creative fight choreography that uses the boss arena effectively, as well as tactics other than just, hitting him until he dies.
This is where the whole issue I have with this video being made when there were only 3 episodes is fully shown. You say that maybe Kamoshida's boss fight will be an improvement, but you didn't wait to see if that would be the case. If you made this video after episode 4 aired, then you could have judged the fight for yourself, and if you thought it sucked, then you could add that to your argument about the action. Your video was uploaded on the same day that episode 4 aired. I know this because I clearly remember seeing it pop up several hours before I watched episode 4. Even though you were likely working on this video at least several days beforehand, you still could have kept it on hold, watched episode 4, and then throw in your thoughts as a last-minute edit. Personally, I thought the Kamoshida fight was decent. Aside from the awful CG they used for Kamoshida, I found it weird how they shoved the fusion tutorial in the middle of it, but I thought it was more dynamic and exciting than the fights before, partially due to them mimicking the sending someone to steal the crown strategy. From that point, he just explains that even if the boss fights were done amazingly, they wouldn't be the same as playing them, and then just concludes by effectively reiterating everything he said before. So I'm just going to end it off here. While Persona 5 the animation is definitely nowhere close to the quality of the game and has tons of problems, I disagree with the notion of it being pointless because you can just play the game for the reasons I stated before. Once again, I'm speaking for myself here, but the reason why I wanted a Persona 5 anime before one was announced was because the game's anime cutscenes gave me a taste of what one would look like, and mainly due to me wanting to see them flesh out various parts of the game, like the scenes that use the in-game models by presenting them in that format, whilst the game obviously wouldn't be able to realistically do that. I'm not trying to sound condescending, but wouldn't that be a good reason to justify the existence of an anime adaptation? Even back then, I never expected my hypothetical Persona 5 the animation to be as good as playing the game, and that carried over to the actual anime when it was announced. But I still wanted it to happen for that reason. But as I've made apparent throughout this video, my biggest issue is the fact that this was made when only 3 episodes of the anime had aired, rather than waiting for it to finish, or at least wait for a later point in the show before completely writing it off as bad and pointless. If this video was instead, Persona 5 the animation has a bad start, then I would be completely okay with it, but instead you're saying the whole thing is bad from just the beginning. I know plenty of people do this thing where they watch the first 3 episodes of an anime and use that to determine if they want to watch more, and it's perfectly fine to do that and think, I just can't get into this. But it shouldn't be used to say a show in its entirety is bad. In fact, the beginning of Persona 5 is quite tutorial heavy and on the slow side, but I obviously don't judge the entire game solely on that part, as seen by the fact I loved the game to death. At the beginning of last month, I started watching Is It Wrong to Try to Pick Up Girls in a Dungeon, and after seeing the first 3 episodes, I thought it was good, but I felt I wasn't really getting into it. However, I persevered as there weren't that many episodes, and after that point, I started getting into it a lot, and by the end, I really enjoyed it. If I assumed the rest of the series' quality would remain the same as those first 3 episodes, I would never have ended up liking it. As a result of the approach you took for this video, it has become incredibly outdated due to the problems you discussed becoming minor by the time the main anime wrapped up, or being improved upon, albeit some are subjective. So I think it doesn't paint a fair picture of the show. After the Kamoshida arc, I felt the show started to get much better. The pacing stopped being so fast most of the time, the animation started to look good more consistently, they toned down and later improved the shitty all-out attacks, the fights became more dynamic, and they started including more original content that wasn't in the game that I also greatly appreciated, as well as some changes I thought were better than the game. It's not just me who felt this way, as after the anime started, every Sunday I would come across episode reviews by Thither, when he was still doing YouTube, and both he and the comments' opinions of the anime gradually became more positive for the most part as it progressed. The later episodes still had issues here and there, and there were even episodes where I thought the pacing was too slow, so if I was to make a graph of my thoughts on each episode, it would kind of fluctuate. The reason why I don't outright dislike Persona 5 the animation is because the things I think the anime did well prevents me from thinking it's bad, but the bad things also prevent me from thinking it's good, so they end up cancelling each other out and make me think of it as meh. Generally, I don't like to use information that wasn't known at the time the video was made when I respond to someone, but it's an exception here as I feel you should have known that there was still plenty more episodes of the anime to come, which could have very well fixed up the issues from before, rather than being fatalistic and assuming the anime wouldn't change. The moral of the story I'm trying to push here is that while first impressions are important, it shouldn't solely be used to judge something in its entirety. That's enough of me rambling on about this one point, so I guess I'll see you guys for my next response. Again, whatever that may be.